Hi everyone, I'm Karl Pauls. I'm a mid-sized content creator in the pro-nuclear space. I've been producing live YouTube shows for ESNA.Earth with the benefit of Gabriel Ignetti's help and the support of wonderful people like you. Some of our best shows covered synthetic fuels with Dr. G.K. Shriya Prakash and a debunk of Netflix's 3 Mile Island with Lake Barrett. I almost left out this intro from my presentation because my behind-the-scenes activism is so much more consequential. 3 years ago, that's right, it has been 3 years since the last Thorium Energy Alliance Conference in Oak Ridge. I'm happy to see you all, and I hope that everyone online enjoys the program. We've made it this far, we're growing and becoming stronger as an advocacy community, and today I'm happy to share with you my journey, my history, and the history of my organizations, our challenges and victories, and what you and I are going to achieve together. 3 years ago, I spoke to you from near my childhood home and delivered a vision for a big tent organization which would move the public towards supporting nuclear energy and other vital climate solutions. I'm excited to show you that there are hidden eco-modernist allies all around us, that we need to develop the consensus-building relationships, and we need to activate the rational and solutions-focused majority for humankind to survive and thrive in the future. I really only became a nuclear advocate after living in Seattle, Washington for a few years. Washington has a complex history with nuclear energy, somewhat ironically connected to my family. My father was a construction site manager at SATSIP, and I formed my earliest memories not far from this plant on a massive 1.5 acres of really dense wooded wonderland. You can't replace that. But even before the first Washington Public Power Supply System, or WPS plant, was finished, SATSIP would be canceled despite being 75% completed. So my family moved on to where there was more nuclear work in East Tennessee. Intertwining my personal history is the story of the failure and rebirth of nuclear energy in the US. In 1969, the anti-nuclear movement took off with the founding of the Friends of the Earth and the group which would later be renamed Greenpeace. At the same time, the Western US was just getting started with a major electrical system built out, including 20 nuclear reactors. These would be constructed to serve the baby boom echo generation. Unlike in Tennessee, our federal regulator couldn't own the generating resources. And in the 70s, after these projects were already conceived, a new IRS rule prevented the tax-free use of net metering to guarantee the loans. Well, municipal bonds came to the rescue, thankfully. If this was any other federal project, it might have been too big to fail, but WPS is a cobbled-together consumer co-op. It benefited from tax-exempt public bonds, but those bonds needed to return their investment without the enormous lending power of the Federal Reserve. I'm about as old as the project itself, so I don't have a great deal of firsthand knowledge. But I've picked up anecdotes, and combined with the history as written, I think I've got a fair appreciation for this failure. It was the most complex construction project that Washington had ever seen. Around 1980, my dad was writing COBOL code to track jobs and accounts as part of the attempt to control project scope. The scope was increasing partly because of the regulatory change from the AAC to the NRC. My dad once told me the best way to ruin a project was to change the rules halfway through. Of course, there's also some subcontractor mismanagement. The firms had an interest in keeping the money flowing, and there were conflicts of interest, like executives involved in the process of proposing bonds to the public. At the crux of this already failing project was the promise of adding 2 more reactors for a total of 5. If there is currently any hope for old nuclear in America, it's for all of our plants to have more than 1 reactor. Better labor efficiency, more flexibility, and management consolidations means that today 2-unit plants are more likely to remain open. WPS's financial viability depended on the twin units, SATSIP and Richland, being completed. But in 1976, with the help of the burgeoning anti-nuclear movement, in the Seattle City Council withdrew City Light from the second reactor projects. The same year, California moved to halt new nuclear, and 1979 saw both the accident at 3 Mile Island and the more directly harmful Church Rock uranium tailings spill. What a career my dad had to look forward to. Less than a decade out of school with a new family, and he went from managing regular civic construction projects to a doomed multi-billion-dollar snarl of subcontracting jobs. Well, I could have been a nuclear engineer, but I didn't spend more than a day thinking about the program at the University of Tennessee. I ran to the West Coast to make video games. This environmental stuff became a weekend hobby for me, not something to spend my life's work pursuing. We'd go up the mountain on school retreat, and the tour guides told us all about acid rain and passive house designs that would work with nature. By the 90s, we had solved that acid rain problem with an amendment to the Clean Air Act. Environment wasn't my profession, but another part of the intellectual puzzling over the real world that I was going to give up to my smarter peers. These were the sons and daughters of Oak Ridge scientists and engineers. These were the ones getting perfect SAT scores and wowing the judges of the Future Problem Solvers events. I was just lucky enough to be in the room with them. Well, I've been told the nuclear industry has a bit of a similar self-confidence problem. Prevailing wisdom has prevented us from engaging with the public. This created a big blind spot that I believe we now have a solution to, but unfortunately, it helped us lose 29 gigawatts of nuclear capacity since 2018. Living in Tennessee, when I went to the American Museum of Science and Energy about once a year, I learned all about nuclear. I learned how it made energy. I memorized enough facts to play all the way through that sword-fighting quiz game they had in the 80s. I saw the enormous cross-section of the flask trains and the hot cells and mechanical arms. Nothing inspired me to follow my dad's career. I wasn't alone. Looking at the statistics, the number of nuclear engineers graduating in the 90s was at an all-time low. After high school, I moved to Washington, where I did stay involved in activism. I kept up the weekend warrior vibe. I volunteered for the political campaigns that I liked, and I planted trees. Well, if everyone does their own part, and maybe like we ride the bus once in a while, that's going to solve our problems, right? Is that ambitious? I came out of my apathy with the birth of my daughter over a decade later. I was in Seattle and contracting for a AAA games company. I saw the evidence of my limited ambitions, so I'm ready to solve problems now. It's serious for me finally. I've got the resume to do just about anything I want, but my weekend activism wasn't really accomplishing much. We had reduced our emissions since 2008, but it didn't rise to the challenge that my home senator Al Gore had put before us. At his 2006 film, An Inconvenient Truth, the world was headed in the right direction. You know, we changed from Team Red to Team Blue, right? Well, coal changed to gas the way those teams changed. It felt like progress, but it wasn't a real climate solution. The same kind of ugly politics of the 90s was ready for the next changing of the guard. Because in 2016, while Washington was definitely organized against Team Red, and I was on board, I volunteered, I worked hard on the weekends especially for Team Blue, underneath it all, there was a much more consequential local issue, the carbon tax. What an amazing concept. We can control carbon emissions by finally penalizing it. Maybe like we beat acid rain, we can beat climate change. Even the Union of Concerned Scientists, which helped lead Even the Union of Concerned Scientists, which helped lead the charge against nuclear energy in the 70s, has said that $25 per ton of carbon tax would save old nuclear plants. This was great. November 2016, and every political engine was firing on all cylinders, right? It was a cakewalk. We're going to win this. Well, it didn't go the way I wanted. Not for Team Blue and not for the carbon tax. Seattle 350 and the connected social justice groups had defeated Washington's carbon tax initiative. That same year, the Seattle City Council passed a new resolution opposing nuclear energy. The anti-climate green political groups were pulling in the opposite direction from what I thought was my own team. I had to know why my own team was so fragmented, why we weren't all working on the same big problems. So I started going to 350 meetings. Just about immediately, I was part of the media team for the anti-fossil fuel Keep It in the Ground campaign. We worked with some Washington tribes. We protested against natural gas infrastructure. I started working on media, of course, because of my professional interest. And live streaming and doing all this was absolutely fantastic for the environmental movement. But the refrain from my peers about natural gas was, oh, it's going to blow up, not climate change, not any kind of other side effects, but it's going to blow up. This was immediately following the Dakota Access Pipeline, and media outlets like Democracy Now! Loved everything that we were creating. My own activist revelation was the introduction to thorium. Like many of you, I'm excited by the prospect of a miraculously safe, clean, and carbon-free energy source. What we do here is a great benefit to the nuclear community in general. No matter what your favorite type of reactor is, your advocacy has the potential to move more hidden allies towards climate solutions of the future. Now I want to ask you to take the next step. When I encountered the thorium community, I already had a fair nuclear science background. In the 90s, I received the Atomic Merit Badge, and the very few gaps in my knowledge were easily filled by Gordon McDowell's videos. And his personal advice, by the way. He gave me direct responses in Patreon about the state of the modern nuclear industry. And so I went through it all. I reviewed the Thorium Energy Alliance proceedings, and I found a guy named Nick Turan. He was speaking right down the street from me. At Nick's speech, I met the other friends of Fission and the Mothers for Nuclear, Scott Montgomery, Jim Conca, and we continued to meet. They benefited from my media skills, and my own YouTube channel hosts some wonderful content from all of our speakers, including those from colleges to nuclear startups. What the founders, Brian and Paula King, have done and continue to do has been far more valuable to our climate than any YouTube video. The Kings reached out to public officials, which is a very important activity we're going to talk about later today. One of them was Washington Representative Joe Fitzgibbon. Whether his position has changed or not, we benefit from his knowledge of nuclear science and the complexity of climate solutions. Fitzgibbon authored Washington's Clean Energy Transformation Act. This sets a very high price for carbon, for coal, and eventually a price on natural gas emissions. Unlike France's Energy Transition for Green Growth Act, the Washington law does not limit nuclear growth. Of course, we have other laws, and we're going to repeal those, right? But it's not a renewable mandate. It's a clean energy mandate. And if there's any chance that speaking to our representative about nuclear averted a new anti-nuclear law, I think we better repeat that activism. This is what I think of as the real activism of an ecomodernist. Can you spot the ecomodernist on the screen? It's not tweeting, it's not blogging, it's not even posting videos and podcasts. But those help, so don't stop. Activism is local engagement. It's calling your public officials, no matter how hopeless, and making your case. Some of them will listen, or at least they'll be better equipped to deal with the NIMBYs and crazies who won't stop filling up their inbox. Activism is participating in local groups of all kinds, environmental groups, book clubs, political parties. It's attending energy conferences and utility board meetings. We got to get out of our bubble and network with other people. Over the last decade, the Seattle Friends of Fission has been active at the March for Science and Climate Strike. We've tabled at museums and presented lectures at local bars and venues. We've met with even more public officials and utility board members. We built a small network of nuclear allies and continue to benefit from these relationships. I'm perhaps most proud of the connection that developed after we approached the Pacific Science Center for Climate Week. Turns out there's a fellow named Nathan Myhrvold on their board. He was actually happy to hear that a nuclear advocate group wanted to speak at their facility. Well, he's also on the board of TerraPower. We helped to arrange for a showing of the new fire, and TerraPower was also invited to participate in Climate Week. Well, in late 2018, Team Blue was back on track. This time, I was connected and energized. I put hundreds of hours into a new try on the carbon tax in Washington. But unfortunately, political divisions along party lines this time defeated it. Along the way, I met organizers who work with the Sunrise Movement and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal. So we absolutely must stay aware and connected, and this is why. Only because of my participation in 350 Seattle did I hear about a letter demanding anti-nuclear provisions in the Green New Deal. The deal's details were actually unknown at this time, but the press reported on these 600 plus signatures as endorsing it, as endorsing AOC's plan. But they're actually co-opting it. They're asking to prevent nuclear and to prevent carbon capture that the Green New Deal was in fact open to. The more allies you have on the front lines, the better your chances of fighting against stuff like this. Of course, I did try to object. But more than once, 350 Seattle signed anti-nuclear letters right under my nose. I complained every time, of course. But eventually I found our own nuclear activism to be so consuming that I had no time for 350. I still think it's worthwhile. If you have the time, you don't know where to start, you absolutely should reach out to your local environmental groups. You're not there to argue about nuclear. You're there to pull in the same direction. We want to fix climate change. We want to go towards climate justice and away from delay and defeat. But if anti-nuclearism comes up, you will be ready to act. The Democratic Party has been anti-nuclear for a long time. From Arnold Schwarzenegger to John Kerry and Al Gore, again and again they say, oh, I don't like it. No thanks. But we're going to keep going. In 2020, the Washington State Democratic Party held a virtual state caucus. I ran across coverage of the NW Progressive on that proceeding. I was captivated by this debate. It's within the Democratic Party. It was in favor of nuclear energy. But unfortunately, I wasn't ready to follow up with the speakers. However, I was very lucky. Steve Verhey came looking for me and the Friends of Fission. And after 6 months of canceled meetings and sitting at home playing video games, I took the time to schedule weekly Zoom calls to reconnect with the Friends of Fission community. That's where Steve Verhey found me, and he invited everyone to join the Washington Democrats' Environment and Climate Caucus. My Zoom calls became live streams with wonderful speakers like Jim Conca. I was proud to host one of the first Stand Up for Nuclear events. And when COVID had shut down Labor Day at the concert at Seattle Center in 2020, I launched the first Stand Up for Nuclear hybrid event. We even got our picture in the Seattle Times digital edition that week. It was a big empty park, and we are the only ones there. Sometimes our public interactions are pleasant, and sometimes not. I've been excluded from events I previously helped host with the Seattle DSA Eco-Socialist Caucus. And at 2021's climate strike, the Physicians for Social Responsibility showed up. They actually co-opted it. They had speeches against nuclear energy. Anti-nuclear groups like PSR have dogged our footsteps for many years. Even the attempts to pass pro-nuclear resolutions in the Environment Caucus have all failed. But we have nudged many influential members of that caucus and members of the public in the right direction. On May 2nd, 2019, there was a serious nuclear incident in the middle of a major American city. This neighborhood has a population of 50,000 people per square mile. decom workers had accidentally sliced open a cesium irradiator source. The Seattle Fire Department responded to Harborview's research building. Unfortunately, it was somewhat late and more serious than anticipated. The HVAC had run for a significant time, I think maybe over an hour, and several workers were put under observation for at least a few days. The cesium source accident at UW's Harborview received no attention from the politicians and anti-nuclear activists who asked us to shut down Columbia Generating Station. The reality of a radiological accident isn't as exciting as it was in movies like Pandora or the China Syndrome. Radiation is the easiest pollution to detect. Paradoxically, while cleanup should be straightforward, because it is so easy to detect and our science around low-dose radiation is so uncertain, we're very timid about the results. I believe that innovation in nuclear activism explicitly demands on speaking more frankly about radiation risk, and that means telling the story of Harborview to the public every chance I get. It should be as mundane as the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Sure, there are nuclear incidents in our past that are terrible, and frankly, really embarrassing. But we don't live in the past. And we're not afraid to drive over a bridge because it might flip upside down and collapse like Tacoma Narrows. Well, now we're getting to the exciting part where it all comes together. Myself, Paula King, and our newest organizer, Lila El Wakil, participated in the Washington Democrats' Environment Caucus. Chidam Captain headed up an ad hoc committee to delve into the topic of nuclear energy constructively so that our party could build a consensus. At first, these discussions were very heated, but over the course of nearly a year, we pressed onward, collecting papers and responding to one another's citations. By the end of our time, every nuclear energy opponent had withdrawn. I had to end up playing devil's advocate a few times because the other side had simply given up. So we thought. In the end, the non-participation of the anti-nuclear camp was proposed as evidence that the paper was illegitimate. Thankfully, with fair moderation in the caucus, our long Zoom meetings played out this conflict, and it did not go well for the anti-nuclear camp. We worked hard to complete our report before the Democratic State Party Convention. We were rewarded fantastically because at the convention, our delegates faced a new anti-nuclear resolution, which thankfully had not passed in committee. Party leadership was not going to rubber stamp another anti-nuclear plank. And so it was put to vote, and we crushed it. 420 delegates voted down the resolution, and only 206 supported it. The Democratic Party has changed. Thank you. I think all it took was a bit of patience, perseverance, and some friendly conversations. So, the nuclear community is coming together. With our success at COP26 and the follow-up in Pittsburgh, there are opportunities for those of you who are willing to travel today to join NAYGN or Generation Atomic or any other of these wonderful groups and become part of our international feet-on-the-ground advocates. Tell your friends and family about the new film, Atomic Hope, please. I hope you enjoy it tonight. And tell them to please support nuclear energy. Thank all of you so much.